The story behind my collection of short stories, Connecting the Dots. I started writing this book long before I knew what the Capstone project at SHS was. Even before I knew how to walk or speak, I started writing this story. I put pen to paper about 8 years ago, pouring out my heart in a little notebook that I kept hidden under my bed. I thought I'd grow up to laugh at the words I once wrote, thought I'd mock how dramatic I once was. But in reality, I look back at them and am shocked. My life has been full of hardships, some comical, some depressing. Yet for so long I couldn't feel sorry for myself. How could I, when I had a roof over my head and food on the table every night? But looking back on the words I wrote, my heart aches. It aches for the girl that learned pain far too soon and who had to learn how to heal on her own. This mentality that someone always has it worst, I now recognize as being beyond toxic. It doesn't make any problems go away, it just adds guilt and causes an inability to ask for help. People should not be afraid of asking for help, especially as a kid. Yet the reality is they will continue doing so. I wrote this book for the people who can't ask for help, the ones that don't think their issues are serious enough to deserve help. I want to assure them no matter how small their issues are, they are valid. Through writing about my struggles with mental health, family drama, assault, my main goal is teaching the many people who have been through the same that they aren't alone, as well as possibly provide guidance and healing. I'm offering help to those unable to ask for it because I know how hard it is to get out of that toxic mentality. Mental health awareness is seemingly common nowadays, but it so often comes from adults. And I'm sorry to say it, but teenagers don't trust adults. Personally, it took so long for me to ask for help, and even after asking, it took a long time for me to accept help. It's not easy. I wrote a lot about the experiences I have with depression and anxiety in my stories, an attempt to make people going through the same feel less alone and less crazy, but also to show how it does get better. I know how hard it is to believe that. One of the stories I had the most fun writing was Catherine. It was kind of a serious day in my life, but like I so often do, I chose to mock it. We all have our ways of coping. I woke up and glared at the ceiling above, not ready for the day I had ahead of me. What outfit makes me look the most sane? I think that question proved that I wasn't. Sweats would make me look more depressed. A crop top might make her think I'm trashy. Tie-dye gives off I do drugs vibes. I settled on an unproblematic shirt and shorts. I spent the day trying to pretend there was no 5 o'clock appointment I was required to attend. But when 4:30 rolled around and I hopped in the back seat of my mom's car, there was no denying it. I was screwed. My mom told me I was crazy for being anxious about a therapy appointment, but wasn't that why I was being forced to go? When we arrived, she practically pushed me out of the car and dragged me inside. I wished to be a toddler again in that moment, just so I could stomp my feet and scream at the top of my lungs. Throwing a tantrum at 15 wouldn't exactly be acceptable. I tried to stop my lip from pouting, but when you're being forced to talk to a complete stranger about your deepest, darkest feelings, I think it's reasonable. We walked into the tiny office and greeted one another. Oh, and yippee, my dad was there, even more awkward. I surveyed the room. An elephant picture hung above her desk, my favorite animal. Of course, my mother, a big believer in science, pointed this out to me. The wall across from the door was made up of floor-to-ceiling windows. I could only imagine what it was like during a rainstorm. Spoiler, the sound and sight was intoxicating. Maybe this wouldn't be so bad. The question started out easy. What grade are you in? How many siblings do you have? What brought you here? I looked to my mom for that one. I didn't think my answer, long story, would suffice. My mom continued on telling her my life story, my dad chiming in every once in a while. I just sat there with my hands in my lap, eyes on the floor. Every few minutes looking up to see Catherine looking back at me with pity, or my mom looking to me to nod my head in agreement. I pretty much remained that way for the rest of the session. All I had to take away from those 45 minutes was that it is insanely weird hearing someone else sum up your life, or so the parts they choose to exclude. And my weekly sessions that followed gave me plenty of time to fill in the blanks. It's the little things. Something so simple, yet something that makes life so much more magical. There was a time where I thought the only time I could be happy was if something amazing was happening. If I had graduated high school, gotten into college, was getting married. I was always waiting for those big moments. You can't live a life waiting for the big moments, I eventually realized, with the help of a dumb Pinterest quote, that the little moments in life are those that made life worth living. Finding beauty in everything, quite honestly, may be the answer to having a happy life. So by highlighting these moments in my book, maybe other people will start to see what I mean, and maybe they'll start looking for their little moments. At an age where tracking time was a foreign concept to me, my favorite time of day was when the sky faded to the darkest shades of purples and pinks. The time of day when my dad would finally put the laptop he had been glued to all day away. I'd throw on my Velcro sneakers and follow him out the heavy apartment door, down the hall and into the elevator, my sister skipping alongside me, but always trying to get ahead of me. He'd bring us down to a wooden, splintered playground, a few swings, a slide, and monkey bars that I couldn't quite reach. We climbed up to the top of the structure. It was a castle, or a boat, or a plane, whatever we needed it to be. My sister, always in charge of the wheel, steering us away from danger. Me, always in charge of fighting off, more like running from, the monster. My father, the monster, doing the chasing. It was a continuous cycle of me shrieking out of both joy and fear, running, crawling, jumping around, pushing my legs back and forth against the wind, the swing going higher and higher. The higher I got, the more invincible I felt, but even then my dad was tall enough to reach up and grab the swing, bringing me to a halt. But not before he'd jerk it in every possible direction, leaving me and the swing ready to throw up. Eventually the sky grew much too dark and we were much too sweaty and out of breath to continue. We would have to try and rid our beloved castle of the monsters another day. Something I have found to be fairly rare is the story of a teenage girl growing up from an actual teenager's perspective. So the opportunity to have a book written from the proper perspective was very important to me. Because of this, it was so important that the book was entirely in my voice, which was something I had to go back and edit more than once. I wanted to feel like a coming-of-age story, like the reader was growing up with me. One way I chose to do this is by writing two connected stories on opposite ends of the book. These were the stories Hope and Would That I. For context, before I read, Hope is a story about a very real conversation I had with my mom around the time I was in 5th grade. And Would That I was a moment from the summer. It's one of those days, the ones where the sun shining down in your face warms your whole body, and the wind that whistles past your ears sounds like a song written just for you. For a moment the worries that had taken up a permanent residency in the back of my head subsided. For a moment there was silence. Not the kind where you could hear your own breath, the kind that made colors more vibrant and candy taste sweeter. I looked at my mom beside me in the car and sighed. You seem really good today. Why the sad face? She questioned. Exactly. I feel great. Which is very bad. She froze and stared at me, most likely trying to figure out how that statement could possibly make any sense. Without hesitation, I continued. Just as quickly as it gets better, it gets a whole lot worse. So how can I be happy right now knowing that? As soon as the words left my mouth, I realized how depressing they sounded. The look on my mom's face reiterated this. The conversation that followed was less of a talk and more of an argument. I made my case and she made hers. She attempted to persuade me to start focusing on the unwritten future rather than holding on to the past. But how was I supposed to move on from the 5 deaths I grieved that year, the many hospital visits ending with me being diagnosed with anxiety, the constant fighting at my house? A car ride on a pretty day was not enough. It was not enough for me to let myself have hope. As soon as I allowed myself to become optimistic, the world around me would crumble, and my 5th grade self believed this wholeheartedly. Hosier. Hosier? This weather is not meant for rap. Now give me your phone. Please? Matching the music to the weather seemed completely logical to me. Quite honestly didn't understand his hesitation. Cool wind kissed my nose as it blew past. I felt my hair dance in the wind behind me and smiled. It's one of those moments, I giggled. Previously, I had spent months in total misery, spent nights wishing I wouldn't wake up the next morning. The antidepressants were necessary, but I didn't realize how much worse it would get in the beginning. I held on to the hope that the saying, "It gets worse before it gets better," had some truth to it. When the rough patch was over, I was not disappointed. In the beginning, the feeling was only comparable to the feeling of massive waves continuously crashing over you, the water filling your mouth every time you take a breath, the waves dragging you in every direction. Then finally, you dive down. Below the surface, all the noise becomes smothered. The waves roll over your body softly. The sun shining down makes a mosaic of colors form in the water above you. It's hard to get to that place, but all the pain and the fighting is worth it. Every sense felt heightened. I fell in love with living. The color, sounds, smells, tastes. Every flower, every song, every moment. Especially moments like this, when I am reminded of the scared little girl I was in 5th grade, how it all worked out for her. I wish I could have told her, convinced her, the beauty of having hope. One thing I can say with certainty is that writer's block was not what I thought it would be. It wasn't a lack of stories to tell, it was the confusion of what to include and what not to, which kept me from writing entirely. The moment that got me past this is the story connecting the dots. The realization that life doesn't make sense in the moment, but it comes together in the end. gave me the realization that the stories don't have to make sense initially, as long as they came together in the end. If my life is messy and confusing, my book might as well be too. So to end my presentation, I will be reading the final story in my book, Connecting the Dots.
Summer nights are filled with too much silence, too much time to think, which resulted in many anxiety attacks. The unknown has terrified me since I was a kid, but as I grew up, the fear grew too. Instead of not knowing who I'd be friends with next year, or what I'd be learning in school, it was not knowing where I'd attend college, what I would major in, if I'd be successful or not. There seemed to be endless possibilities and outcomes to occur in the next few years. Yet instead of exciting me, that thought only paralyzed me. I held my face in my hands as I rocked back and forth on my bed. My head was so full of worries, it left me unable to form a sentence. I opened my mouth, but only gibberish came out. I tried to say something, anything, wanting to make sense of what I was feeling. It felt impossible. I heard him calling out to me from my phone beside me. He begged me to breathe, telling me over and over it would all be okay. I focused on the sound of his voice, trying to ground myself and get back to reality. After a couple hundred slow breaths in and out, I was able to calm myself down enough to speak. In the shakiest breath, I explained to him that I was scared. I explained that not knowing what was to come in the next few years was too much for me to handle, that my head was exploding with the different possibilities, with all the ways everything can go wrong. But why worry about the future, he says, as if it was that simple. He tells me, you once told me that everything in the past happened for a reason, although you didn't understand it at the time. You later saw how it all came together. I couldn't argue that, when they were in fact my words, so I silently waited for him to continue. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You just keep going and it'll all make sense in the end. That statement was enough to make all the fear fade away. That night, for a brief moment, I knew everything would turn out okay.